The Loftia closed beta has recently come to a close, and I spent a lot of time doing so many different things. Right after the first day, I gave my full first impressions of the game, and now that I've had the whole experience of the entire beta, I wanted to give my complete review of Loftia as it was within the closed beta. Of course, a beta is indeed a beta, and we saw lots of changes during it, and there will be many changes to come as the game approaches early access and the eventual full release. Nevertheless, let's take some time to go over the game. In short, I love it a lot. I had an absolute blast playing through the game, and it generally met my expectations. Sometimes when I try games, I love it, but don't think about it all the time. With Loftia, I definitely thought about the game all the time. I constantly wanted to continue playing the game as I was playing, and when I stopped, I wanted to return, and those feelings stayed true throughout the duration of the beta. The overall gameplay loop is just very engaging for me. Gathering resources out in the world, bringing them to your home, and crafting things out of them is an incredibly common idea in many games, but Loftia takes it and adds a classic MMO twist to it that just makes the entire system feel very charming. And then on top of all that, Loftia adds the entire idea of sustainability to the crafting system, where you aren't really doing things like disrupting the environment by digging up ores and whatnot. You're going to places to salvage items to then repurpose those items. Then on top of all that, you have the entire sense of progression throughout the game, where you're leveling up your skills and unlocking perks and whatnot to improve your ability to do different things. Crafting in general is pretty important for your progression through the game. You need to create different things in order to access different areas and do different things. Ultimately, the amount of linear progression present in the game is pretty minimal with what we see in the closed beta specifically. It did not take too long, and it personally wasn't difficult to progress through the main quests, unlock everything you need, and to get to the end of the initial story that was present. Really quickly, the story was actually pretty fun, and I really enjoyed the vibes, while also being intrigued about what is to come. Though, admittedly, I tend to love most games' stories, so I may not be the best judge of it. Anyways, beyond the initial progression of the game, everything opens up and becomes available to do. Generally speaking, I've enjoyed playing through everything. The skills and gathering have been fun, like I've talked about. Adventures in particular are incredibly fun, especially when you team up with a friend and try hard them a little bit to complete everything and to beat your personal time record. I've talked about this a bunch, but one of the things I'm most excited for is the adventure editor. I love getting creative with stuff like housing, but something I love even more is coming up with different puzzles and just places to explore. I've loved exploring through the different open world maps and just looking into every different nook and cranny. All the content found throughout the map has been enjoyable for me too. I'm just super excited to see all of these ideas expand and evolve in the future. More events and more maps in particular are things I am super excited to see more of once early access begins and as the game continues forward. I've spent a lot of the closed beta just working on some videos, some of which I've recorded some footage and initial ideas for videos I want to make in between now and early access, but I made multiple Loftia overview videos going super in-depth to all of the big and most important aspects of Loftia, which I will put down in the description if you want to hear more about them, specifically alongside my thoughts on all of the content. One idea that I want to elaborate a little bit more on is just how excited I am with the community projects. As a reminder, this is one of the biggest social features in the game where the entire community comes together to repair or build various things around the world. I loved playing around with this in the closed beta with the project that was available to do. I love the idea of collecting a bunch of resources and supplying the effort alongside everyone else, with doing so leading to a massive impact on the world with some visual changes, but also unlocking new permanent things for everyone. It just makes the world not only feel super cozy, but to provide a deepened sense of community that I believe is missing in many other MMOs. When you take into consideration how many other social features that not only exist but are also engaging, combined with all of this, it just makes Loftia truly feel like an MMO. I think the closed beta was a little extra special to some extent because it had a much smaller community compared to what we will presumably see when Loftia enters early access. I interacted with a lot of people outside of the game and then saw them in the game and vice versa, which is always a great experience. Additionally, I kept seeing the same people over and over and recognized them in subsequent meetings. The sense of community just felt a little extra special, and I hope the vibes continue as early access releases, but I imagine that specific aspect will be a little worse just because of how many more people will be playing, which is obviously ultimately a good thing. I've spent most of this video and pretty much the entirety of all of my previous closed beta videos talking about how much I love Loftia, because I genuinely do, but let's go ahead and dive into the things that are potentially less good. If you know me or my channel, I don't typically talk about stuff like this, but I think it's important to highlight at this stage in the development cycle of Loftia. I have two small things and then one kind of big, slightly polarizing topic. The first small thing is that gliding feels a little weird in general. A quick caveat is that the game I have played the most in my life is Guild Wars 2, and one of the, if not the most fundamental philosophical design ideas in the game is the concept of freedom of movement, where movement in Guild Wars 2 feels incredibly fluid and very open. It is pretty much as close to a skill-based movement in a traditional MMO that you can get before you start implementing CPMA style systems into the game. So the idea of movement in an MMO is something that I subconsciously care a lot about. When it comes to the entire idea of movement in Loftia, it is really good. Running around feels great, jumping feels pretty okay, etc, etc, except gliding just feels a little wonky. Moving while gliding is not only a bit harder to do than every other movement, it just feels kind of clunky to turn. If you want to do a 180 while midair, I did not really figure out a good way to do that. Everything just doesn't feel smooth. Additionally, and this may be ignorance on my part, but once you unlock the propeller, it can feel like your glider gets nerfed a little bit. The propeller is phenomenal for providing a boost to your glide, but you activate it when you first start gliding, meaning that anytime you want to do glide, you are going to be launched into the air, which can obviously be annoying in certain circumstances where you just want to glide normally. Second, for my other small thing, and this is really not an issue at all, but the beta definitely felt like a beta to some extent. First and foremost, the game definitely had a handful of bugs. None of them were too game-breaking, so nothing felt too bad to deal with. The worst bugs were related to parties and neighborhoods, which made it a little bit harder to play with friends. But of course, this was a beta, so it is completely expected and okay. The game also doesn't feel super optimized, as both my fiance and I were having unusual GPU issues. Additionally, the total amount of content does feel a little limiting. Don't get me wrong, there was a ton to do in the closed beta, but if you played the game for an hour or two every day, you pretty much completed everything that was available beyond collecting some additional outfits and whatnot. For people who want to pour a ton of time into the game and don't care too much about the social aspects of the game, there just might not be a lot to do in the long term. Of course, this is just the closed beta and we can expect more content in the future, but having some longer term objectives or more things you can do every day might be good options to have for people who want to consistently play the game for a long time. Now for the biggest issue, and this is something I see a lot from various people who played the game that I didn't personally have any issues with firsthand, and this is kind of a sensitive topic, so I'm going to do my best to go through it as best as I can. To be honest, I don't even know how to summarize this idea, but I'll just describe it as the difficulty of the game in the context of personal experience and ability. Loftia is a pretty chill and casual game. There are some parts that may be more stressful, like doing adventures by yourself with no perks and no knowledge of what is going on, but largely the entire game is pretty easy. The game is designed in a way to be welcoming and open to so many different types of players, but a good number of people in the beta had a difficult time playing the game, and I think this is something that is really hard to balance. Let's go through some examples. In a poll, around about 25% of the community thought that fishing was too difficult, while 75% didn't. In my personal experience, fishing was incredibly easy and became even easier after they made an update partway through the beta, making it a bit easier. But even after that update, people still had a tough time fishing, and I think a big part of why fishing was so easy for me is because while I'm not a professional, I'm pretty good at playing games and have a lot of experience with different types of fishing and time-based minigames throughout multiple different games. People who have less experience than me will obviously on average have a harder time with stuff like this. But from my perspective, I think making the fishing minigame even easier than it already is would just not be creating a fun experience. While Loftia is supposed to be an easy game, it is still a game, and if you're playing a game, you have to do things or the game is just not engaging at all. There has to be some level of some sort of obstacle, even if it is incredibly easy, in order to make the game feel rewarding to play at all. A lot of people would not enjoy Loftia if you could just teleport everywhere and spawn in any item you want, because that takes away pretty much every gameplay element in the game. Another issue that a lot of people had is figuring out where things are. And I think this loops back into the previous idea, but is exacerbated by the fact that Loftia is an MMO in design, which just makes things a little bit more complex. And again, similar to fishing, I just didn't have too many issues with finding stuff in the game. It took me about 10 hours to casually find everything I needed to do for the main quest, while doing a bunch of optional side stuff. I think the biggest issue with this is definitely how new the game is. I talked a bit about this before the closed beta with how exciting it is that Loftia is a brand new game just because we have to figure everything out, and I definitely had a phenomenal time figuring everything out. But a lot of people don't enjoy figuring things out, so naturally, as Loftia is out for longer, this will become less of an issue. But just like how any game should be, there should be some level of having to figure things out, especially in a game that has an open world. You should have to explore the world a tiny bit and figure out where things are. Another issue related to all of this, and this is getting more into the category where I feel like I may come off as rude, but I genuinely don't mean to be. Some people had issues with playing through aspects of the game that are just really, truly not that difficult. For example, somebody had a really hard time getting across the few small jumps between the overgrowth and the rest of the hanging gardens, where they just couldn't get across this area because the jumps were too difficult for them. And honestly, truly, I do genuinely feel bad that they were getting so frustrated at this. Nobody should be doing something they don't enjoy, but this specific thing is just so simple for so many other people to complete that I think you have to recognize what kind of game Loftia is on a fundamental level. It is an open world game where you walk to different places and do different things. If you have a hard time with the most basic aspects of the game, and you don't have fun engaging in the most basic aspects of the game, the sad reality is that Loftia might just not be the game for you. And that is a completely okay thing. Not every game has to be for everyone. There's definitely lots of games that just aren't for me, so I just don't play them. Now, a more complicated aspect of this is the idea of accessibility. No matter how easy or difficult a game is, every game that exists should strive to be as accessible as possible. Through basic features like colorblind modes, controller support, and subtitles, all the way to more advanced features like complete UI customization and text-to-speech. Any game can add ways to make the game more accessible with more options. I didn't dive fully deep into how Loftia is. I believe they've done a decent job so far, but other people may be able to elaborate more on this in the future. But no matter how good or bad Loftia currently is, or any other game for that matter, Loftia should always continue to strive to making the game as accessible as possible. But there is a massive difference between accessibility through settings and accessibility through game design, where potentially Loftia might not technically be the most accessible game from a game design perspective based on everything we talked about thus far. Fishing isn't the most accessible thing because it requires timing, which some people, completely regardless of any level of potential skill, will just have issues with. Figuring out where things are and remembering where those things are, completely regardless of any level of potential skill, will just straight up be an issue for some people. And being able to make basic jumps, completely regardless of any level of potential skill, will once again straight up be an issue for some people. All of this is just a reality. So what is Loftia's solution to this? Well, it can be a big issue. In order to make the game completely accessible in every way, the game has to completely change on a foundational level to the point that the game would basically be unrecognizable compared to what it is in its current form. And is that a good thing to happen? Well, unfortunately, probably not. Changing aspects of the game to make it more accessible is definitely a good idea when done carefully and thoughtfully, but completely redoing the game from the ground up will be great for some people, but it will just make the game a worse experience for so many other people. And I think this is just an unfortunate reality with games and with the type of game that Loftia is. No matter what you do, some aspects of the game is never going to satisfy the entire potential audience of the game. And I think for everyone, people who may think the game is too easy, or people who may think the game is too hard, I think this loops back around to the idea that you may just have to recognize that the game is just not for you. And once again, that can be a sad thing, but it is always a completely okay thing. Not every single game has to be the game for you. For me personally, I love Loftia in its current state. I've had so much fun with it, and I find it incredibly engaging to play, despite of how easy it is for me to play. But I also recognize that there are issues that people have with the game, and I do think it is important for the Loftia team to continuously look at those issues and do their best to make the game as accessible as possible, both in the form of adding settings and in the form of accessible game design. But ultimately, I hope the game doesn't dramatically change in a massive way just for the sake of making it as easy as possible, because it could potentially make the game worse for other people. But if it does, I do hope it is in the best interest of the game, and in the best interest of the largest proportion of people, even if it isn't the best for me personally. And that's my full review. In short, I absolutely love Loftia, and I think the game has an incredible future ahead. I definitely recommend trying out the game when it reaches early access, and you should make sure to wishlist the game on Steam if you are interested in it. I hope you all enjoyed watching, and I hope you all are taking great care of yourselves. Have a good one, everyone.